The suspected attacks yesterday on 2 oil tankers near the strategically vital Straits of Hormuz ratcheted already high tensions between the U.S. and Iran to a new level. And global reaction has varied in markedly different ways. The United Nations Secretary General called for an independent investigation. President Trump says the U.S. knows Iran was responsible. Nonetheless, today he expressed interest in talks with Tehran. Japan's Prime Minister Shinzo Abe condemned the attacks, one of which hit a Japanese-operated tanker while Abe was in Tehran. And Iran's President Hassan Rouhani accused the U.S. of radicalizing the situation in the region and pursuing an aggressive policy against the Islamic Republic. At the Pentagon today, Acting Defense Secretary Shanahan had this to say.
We have an international situation there in the Middle East. It's not a U.S. situation, and the focus for myself and Ambassador Bolton and Secretary Pompeo is to build international consensus to this international problem.
We take a closer look at what is at stake and how Iran might respond with Reuel Marc Gerecht. He was a CIA operations officer in the Middle East in the 1980s and 90s. He's now a senior fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. And Vali Nasser. He's a Middle East scholar who served in the Obama administration State Department. He's now the dean of the School of Advanced and International Studies at Johns Hopkins University, although soon he will step down from that job in order to advise Democratic presidential candidates. And we welcome both of you back to the NewsHour. So my first question to both of you is, do you accept the Trump administration insistence that this was Iran that was behind these attacks? Vali Nasser?
I think more than likely, yes, although we have to see the final proof, and the administration will do well to provide irrefutable proof. But I think more than likely Iran did it. It happened in a way that provides them with plausible deniability. And now there actually is a very interesting situation where the debate is about whether they did it rather than about what are the ramifications and what signal they were trying to send.
Do you believe the administration is correct in saying it was Iran?
Yeah, I don't think there's any plausible candidate besides Iran. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps naval units have a long history of training and using mines in the Persian Gulf, so I think it's pretty conclusive.
So why are they doing this? Why did they do it?
Well, I think there are a few reasons. I think most importantly, they're trying to spook the Europeans, the Japanese, and others. They're trying to send a signal to put pressure on the Americans to sort of back off. I think they also enjoy it. I mean, I think there's a certain fillip of revolutionary pride here.
Enjoy it?
Yeah. I think they've been under tremendous sanctions pressure, and they wanted a means to strike back. They can't strike back directly against the Americans because they know that would be, I think, suicidal. So they go after others. They go after peripheral targets. And I think it gives them considerable satisfaction, as well as, they hope, achieving a strategic goal of getting everybody worried that chaos might break out, war might break out, and the Americans will be put in a tight spot.
Vali Nasser, what do you see as the motive here?
Well, I think Iran wants to show that it's defiant, that maximum pressure strategy of President Trump has not worked, and that they are also capable of resisting the United States and also escalating cost. And in particular, if this president does not want to go to war, Iran acting rashly, threatening escalation, could essentially turn the tables on the president. But I also think that Iran cannot go to the table with the United States looking like it's surrendering, like it's capitulating. So given that Prime Minister Abe was in Tehran, everybody was expecting that he had carried messages from President Trump and may bring messages back. I think the Iranians wanted to send a message both to domestic audience and international audience that regardless of what Abe brought to them, they are nevertheless are going to be defined, and this is not going to be easy for the United States.
So, Reuel Gerecht, does this bring Iran closer to what they want? Do these attacks do that?
Well, it depends. I think it depends in part on how the United States responds. I think it's eventually the United States is going to have to prohibit them from using mining operations in the Persian Gulf. I think the U.S. Navy is going to get quite cranky about this. If you recall, It was a mine attack in 1988 that led President Reagan to authorize the U.S. Navy to essentially destroy much of the Iranian Navy. So I think the U.S. Navy is inclined to become much more aggressive if the president authorizes it to prevent this type of action. I agree with Volley. I think there is also a predicate being laid for possible negotiations, possible diplomacy. I think the regime is in a very tight spot, and they will perhaps try to find an out with the Trump administration. They may not wait until 2020 to see if the Democrats win.
Well, where do you see that going, Vali Nasser? Because on the one hand, the administration has had this maximum pressure, the Trump administration, maximum pressure. But on the other hand, you hear them saying, the president saying, we would consider talking to them. How do you see that coming about or not?
Well, I think at one level, the purpose of maximum pressure is not clear. So there are elements of the administration who would want either regime change or for Iran to completely capitulate. And then the president in Tokyo said Iran can prosper under the existing regime, and what I really want is to talk to Iran. So I think the United States would do well if it had a clear strategy and it would signal it properly. But I agree with Reuel that Iran is in a tight spot. They don't have an option of going to war with the United States. That would be the end of the Islamic Republic. They cannot suffer under these sanctions as is, and they ultimately may have to come to the table. But it's going to be a very delicate dance of how they get themselves to the table. And we saw some of this with Kim Jong-un and North Korea, that beating their chest, being threatening, is essentially might be a sort of a way to come to the table. And we shouldn't forget that, the Prime Minister of Japan did not go to Iran without at least having some indication that the Iranians would like to hear proposals from the United States. And it's quite possible that he's carrying back at least certain conditionalities and proposals from Iran. So the public messaging between the two sides may, as Reuel say, may be providing a sort of an umbrella or a cover for some kind of an engagement that might be forthcoming.
So it's counterintuitive, but are we saying that the maximum pressure campaign, which may have caused Iran or pushed them into a corner that made them want to do this, Reuel Gerecht, then may in turn lead to talks? Is that what we're? Is that what you're saying?
It's entirely possible. I mean, again, I think it depends what the Iranians do. They're creatures of habit. So since we haven't responded yet to their provocations, and I think in retrospect it was probably a mistake that we didn't respond to the attacks off the coast of Fujairah where there were 4 ships damaged. If we'd been more bold then and said...
This is what happened a few weeks ago.
Right. If we'd been more bold and said, you do that again, we're going to unloose helicopter gunships on the Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy, this might not have happened. So it depends whether they return to these tactics. I suspect they might, in which case I think the U.S. Navy will have to become more forceful. That could derail or delay the process for the regime if it really is trying to find an avenue to have negotiations with President Trump.
But very quickly, right now we are still waiting to see a clear response from the Trump administration. Is that right?
Absolutely, and also we don't know exactly what Prime Minister Abe brought back and what is relayed to the president, and I think Reuel is correct. I think both sides need to show decisiveness as they are perhaps trying to go to talks and gain leverage, but this is exactly why it's dangerous. It can get out of hand, and one signal or one escalation may essentially lead to somewhere where neither country, I think, would want to go.
And in the meantime, you had the acting Defense Secretary Shanahan talking today about an international reaction. So we'll wait to see whether that comes together in some way. Reuel Marc Gerecht, Vali Nasser, we thank you.
Thank you very much.